All right, my favorite chicken chick. She's on her way.
I put the chicken there, so please don't die.
Oh no! It needs to be a cat that talks about chickens, not a chicken that talks about.
I'm a dirt, so this is how it
You missed the like point of the panel. It's like right there. No. But yeah, she said she's on her way.
Okay.
So she should be here in just a minute. No, you. How do you know what chickens sound like?
It tastes good.
You grew up in the city. You don't know what chickens are like.
Oh.
We have
City
6
boy.
chickens. We have 6 chickens.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
Oh my gosh! Why hasn't he invited me over to pet them? I want to pet some chickens. I only get to pet my uncle's chickens because he takes good care of his chickens. Which is honestly, if you ever want to take care of chickens, they're actually some great pets. They are so much fun to have around because my uncle does free roam. So he actually has all did it himself, started it all himself. He has a little chicken coop with a whole fence around it. So he gives chickens a huge part of their yard, and sometimes at least twice or 3 times a day, he just opens up his fence and lets the chickens roam around the yard and go wherever they want. And then like good little chickens, they go back in the pen by the time he needs them to. It's like, oh, that's great. I actually didn't know chickens were so cool like that. But
very smart.
they are. But yeah, one thing that's always hurts me is they're hard to pick up because they will try to run from you all the time. Even if you know them very well. Like, I lived at my uncle's place for half a year doing a summer job with him. He would not trust me. Although he would just go over and just go, whap! And I'm like, well, they should be running from you, not me.
That's so funny.
Hello, I'm here.
Hey, Scarlet! Talking about my uncle's chickens.
Cool.
And I put a chicken right there.
Oh, there's
chickens.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember.
That's not useful.
All I know is I liked petting them. There was one that I liked petting a lot.
Oh, it's like Sheldon.
Oh, we didn't bring Sheldon.
We didn't bring anything. I completely forgot to prepare for this, but that's okay because I have the knowledge.
That's all we need.
I'll give it to the panelists.
That microphone that works.
Yes, you do.
Which one?
That one's works.
No, it's-
Yes, it does.
You guys can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're quiet, I can...
Yeah, adjust it. 'Cause I can't even tell.
Should be...
I'm too loud in my own head.
Stop this chick.
Which one is that? So that should be...
Caw. Oh, I can hear it now. A little bit.
There, it should be a little better. Because that one's turned out a little lower than the others, so you should be good.
Alright. So I guess we'll start off. Does anyone have chickens? Alright. Do you just have them for like eggs for your house or just as pets or what?
A little bit of both. Well, who's talking?
Either or.
Go for it.
Ours are layers and they become pets, but we have no, if something were to happen, we have no problem with them.
So I guess my background, I showed poultry for years through 4-H and also the Wisconsin Junior Poultry Association. I at one point had wanted to go to school for poultry science. That didn't end up happening. I did go to the Poultry Science Summer Institute, which is like poultry science camp down in North Carolina, currently, I do not have any chickens because I live in town, which is sad, but I will hopefully have some again someday. As far as what I raised chickens for, it was mostly for exhibition. I had different breeds of show poultry. I had both geese, chickens. I tried pigeons. I wasn't very good with them. But my main focus was always chickens, my favorite being the standard black cochin. For those of you that don't know, there's over 200 recognized breeds in the American Poultry Association. If I would have actually prepared for this panel, I would have brought my American Poultry Standard of Perfection, which is a giant book that has all the recognized breeds. Mine's really out of date. I think mine's from like 1998. And I think they publish those like every 10 years. I don't know if what all you all are interested in. Like, do you want to know about raising chickens? Do you want to know about different breeds of chickens, poultry anatomy? Like, what is the interest? I can literally talk about anything.
What are the ones with the big fluffy heads?
Silkies.
Well, I mean, there's multiple different breeds. We got Polish, which are have the largest crests. There's the bearded and non-bearded variety.
The ones with the pants.
Are those Americanos?
No, Americanas don't have pants, but the Americanas are also called Easter eggers, and they lay green eggs. But I guess as far as tufted chickens go, you got the Polish, the Silkies, and then you got Sultans, and then what are they called? I think Houdans. Houdans have crests too. They also have 5 toes. Well, Silkies have 5 toes too.
Why do they need that many?
It's just a weird mutation that apparently people started breeding for, and it's become standard. So,
Where did chickens come from?
chickens are the domestic version of the gullis, which is the red jungle fowl out of Asia. And from that one species of bird, we've crossbred and basically made tons of different chickens for different jobs. There are 3 types of poultry. There are ones bred primarily for egg laying, there are ones bred primarily for meat, and then there are dual purpose, which are good for both, but not as good as the egg or meat chickens. Some of the most popular poultry or chickens currently would be part of like the dual purpose class. I would say the ones I see most often are Plymouth Rocks, Rhode Island Reds, and Australorps are pretty common too. I guess there are different classes of chickens that they're classified under. There's continental, which are European origin. There's Asiatic, which are a lot of the ones that have pants. A lot of the feather-footed breeds are of Asiatic. Then there's the American class. I'm not sure if I said that already. And then the Mediterranean, that's the one I was forgetting. The Mediterraneans are the ones that lay white eggs for the most part, though Polishes also lay white eggs.
Why do some lay brown eggs?
Just genetics. You can tell what color egg a chicken lays fairly consistently by the color of their earlobes. Yes, chickens have earlobes, which is the little dangly bit like at the back of their like jawline. And it's under their ear, which is a tiny hole in the side of their head, so that has a little ear muff of feathers. And if a hen has a white earlobe, they lay white eggs almost always. If a hen has red earlobes, they're almost always going to lay brown eggs. And then the Americana has no earlobes because they're usually bearded, so they lay the colored eggs, which can be anywhere from blue to green to pink. And then the Morans actually lay really dark brown. They look like they're chocolate eggs.
Delicious.
Does anybody have questions?
Yes?
I'd love to touch base a little bit on reproduction and breeding, and especially on the acceptable loss rate with chicks. I keep having, eggs that hatch correctly, but then in the brooder, some chicks die, and I can't explain why. So on the forums, they say that it's acceptable to have a 10% loss.
Yeah.
But don't explain any further. What's your take on that?
Well, just like all baby animals, they're pretty fragile. The thing with chickens, because they're usually coddled by like their mothers, the temperature and humidity are pretty important in your brooders. Because if your temperature's off, you'll end up with like pasting up, which is where their vents get manure on them, and that tends to be a problem. You can usually tell fairly easily if your brooder's the right temperature based on how the chicks are clustered. If they're clustered over in the corners, then they're too hot. If they're all squished underneath the heat lamp, they're too cold. But yeah, 10% is generally the accepted amount of loss for chicks. They're just fragile. And if you had like a rough incubation, do you hatch your own eggs?
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes your incubator will have warm spots or cold spots too. It depends.
Yeah.
And if they don't incubate properly, they can have issues after they hatch, or they won't hatch at all. Honestly, hens are the best. It's what they're made for. I've always preferred to just have hen-raised chicks if I can, but most people can't. Just because you have a lot less loss then, as far as like hatch rate and chick loss. I mean, sometimes hens are stupid and they abandon their chicks because the chicks can't keep up and that kind of thing too. But if you keep and pay attention, a hen's a lot better brooder than a brooder is. But most people don't have broody hens to hatch their eggs, so.
So, is it possible to hatch the chicken in the incubator and then have a surrogate mother or something
Yes,
like that?
it is possible to do that.
Okay.
Sometimes. It depends on the hen. Some hens will accept chicks better. I knew some people that do that by actually you gotta get a hen that's broody. For you that don't know what broody means, it means she's ready to sit on eggs. So the hen's behavior will change. If she's ready to sit on eggs, she'll usually sit in the nest box whether she has eggs or not, and she'll be puffed up, and she'll actually make different noises. So you can tell when a hen's broody, and that means she wants to hatch chicks. If you get a broody hen and you put them either in like a box and have it go to sleep, and you actually put the chicks underneath the hen when she's asleep, then she'll wake up and just think she had babies. So then she'll take care of the chicks. But if you just try and put chicks with a hen, she might peck them to death. So as they're not her chicks then. But chickens aren't particularly bright. I mean, some ways they are, but they're pretty easy to trick as far as that goes.
Any tip on, placing the chicks under a hen without waking her up?
Well, if it's dark, like they're kind of, I don't know. I've always caught hens in the night because they don't do anything. Like,
Do they wake up easy?
I mean, they'll wake up, but they're like groggy, like
They won't
Because
be
they're
able to-
roosting, right?
yeah,
They won't know what's
they're
going
roosting
on.
or in their nest boxes.
They'll just
or
hear
whatever.
peeping and suddenly.
Yeah. But you usually want a pretty docile hen, and it helps if she's like had chicks before. But
And do you want the female in the brooder with the high temperature in general, or?
no, you wouldn't need the brooder then. You wouldn't need the light if you have the hen and she's able to sit on all of her chicks.
Okay.
So.
Why do they freak out when they see blood?
Oh, they're attracted to the color red. So if I have a theory, I don't know if anyone's ever done any studies on it, that the reason they have combs and wattles is so that they have targets when they fight. Because if you look, that's what they go for, rather than like the eyes and more important parts. Part of the reason they have combs and wattles are the dangly bits on their necks, and then combs are the meaty crest on their heads. Because they're from the jungle, they use them to release heat, kind of like a rabbit does with its ears. But I think it's also for like fighting and attracting mates and that kind of thing. So those are red, and they're attracted to those. So when they see blood, they go after that too, and you can actually end up with cannibalism, which can be an issue. That's why there's something called blue coat, which you can, if your hen's wounded, you can actually spray that on it, and it turns it blue, and then they're not attracted to the wound anymore.
I know some animals, if they get a taste for human flesh, they prefer it more. Does that happen with chickens?
I don't think so.
Wait, what animal is this?
Dogs and rats, if they get a taste for human flesh, they tend to prefer it more.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my
So
God.
they usually have to put down a dog if it eats its owner. When
probably
they
just
if their owner
chickens are easier to
dies.
catch. I'm trying to think of anything else interesting.
What?
That's a different panel.
Well, I'm sure everyone knows chickens lay eggs. Yeah.
Whoa. Let me write this down.
A female chicken's called a hen. Male chicken's called a cock, but most people call them roosters because, you know, cock's a bad word. I used to get in trouble in school because I didn't know that was a bad word, and I just thought it was chickens. And I guess hens have an ovary, just like mammals. The ovary actually makes the egg yolk. So the egg yolk develops in the ovary, and then it is released into the oviduct, and that's where the albumin, which is the proper term for the white, is added to the egg. And then there's a shell gland, which puts the shell on it. It takes approximately 18 to 20 hours to make an egg. So most hens will lay an egg every day. Some hens lay an egg every other day. That's on the regular, and that's generally they'll lay consistently for about 2 years, and then after that they really drop off. A hen will usually start laying around 6 months old, and at least in the commercial industry, they usually send them off to be processed around a year, year and a half, because it's usually after that point where they're consuming more food than they're producing eggs. So, yeah.
Is it true that they like lay eggs more when they're happier in their environment?
It's mostly due to light.
Really? Because some people have said it's like when they're more comfortable, they'll lay more eggs.
Eggs are basically chicken periods.
Ew.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I'm learning so much. This is like the
Goodness.
best panel ever.
you don't need a rooster to have eggs. A hen will lay regardless of whether the eggs are fertilized or not. You just need a rooster to have chicks. The eggs you buy in the store, those hens have never seen a rooster in their entire lives. So.
People eat them when they're like half.
Yeah,
normal,
balut.
half- Yeah. Ugh.
Those are duck eggs, though.
That's so gross.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, how do you address when a hen lays inconsistently? Like a week, every day an egg, and then, once every 2 days, then back to daily,
Do you have lights on in your coop?
Yeah.
On a timer?
Yeah.
Well, then, how old is your hen?
Probably 6 to 7 months old.
Well, she might not be in a regular cycle yet, though.
Okay.
Yeah, when they're first starting to lay eggs, they can be inconsistent. They also tend to lay smaller eggs. We call them pullet eggs because a young hen's called a pullet. They're called a pullet until they're a year old, usually. And they'll actually lay smaller eggs. Usually, I mean, sometimes they lay giant eggs too, and I don't know how they do it, but... also, when they're first starting to learn how to, or not learn how to lay eggs, they know how to lay eggs, but when they're first starting to lay eggs, sometimes you'll get eggs with more than one yolk, which is interesting.
That's so weird.
Most people who buy eggs at the store never get to see all the weird stuff because it's all screened. Like, they shine lights through all these eggs so that you only get very consistent eggs. But sometimes hens will lay eggs with no shell, so it's just the membrane. Sometimes hens will lay eggs with more than one yolk. Sometimes you'll get really odd-shaped eggs. You'll get eggs with thin spots where they didn't put the shell on completely. Sometimes you get eggs with blood in them, or meat chunks. And that's part of when the yolk is ovulated. It's actually part of the hen's ovary that comes off with the yolk.
We get our eggs from a farmer, and sometimes they still have like little butters and stuff on them. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And if you don't wash your eggs, you don't need to refrigerate them, which is interesting. In Europe, they don't refrigerate their eggs because they don't wash them. When the egg is laid, it has a coating called the bloom, which is kind of like an oil, and it seals the pores on the egg because eggs are full of little teeny holes, and that's how the air transfers into the egg for the baby chick. And if you don't wash it, then those pores are sealed by this thin layer of like oil, and then they'll actually stay fresh longer.
And isn't it like when people say that you can get like salmonella, isn't that from the shell only?
You can get salmonella from eggs if the hens were in unsanitary conditions. So like at big factory farms, sometimes it's higher risk. But salmonella comes from the manure. If your eggs are clean, the risk of salmonella is really low.
Because I know like some people will have just raw eggs for like just health stuff.
Yeah.
And they're fine.
It's fairly rare to have salmonella in eggs. You're more likely to get salmonella poisoning from like lettuce.
So I can eat cookie dough.
Yes, you can eat cookies. I mean, you're risking that there's this tiny chance you might get salmonella from eggs, but
There's a risk I'll get the flu every time I walk outside.
yeah. In the U.S., they wash eggs in bleach solution, so you're very unlikely to get salmonella.
Is that why they're all white?
No,
No,
I explained
about
this. Some
that.
hens just lay white eggs.
But they're super white sometimes.
Another question?
I mean, I do have plenty of questions.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. So, what would be your advice as far as litter goes? I've heard about the deep litter technique where you just add another layer. Is that good, the best? Where are we here?
I've tried deep litter because it's better for the environment in some ways, and it's really good in the winter because it composts and actually produces heat. My preferred method for raising chickens is pastured, if you can. I know most people can't, especially because of land-wise. I volunteer on a farm that does pastured poultry, and they have a mobile chicken tractor that they pull around with their sheep, and that's how they rotate their things. And then if your hens aren't in their coop as much, deep litter's not necessarily needed. Then you can just clean out your coop. I guess in the winter time when your hens are in the coop a lot, then it's good to do deep litter, but you have to make sure you have enough litter, because if you don't, then you smell the ammonia. If you're smelling the ammonia, you're not doing it right. Because the thing with deep litter is you're putting carbon, which is your like wood chips, on the droppings, and it should absorb the ammonia. Chicken droppings are really, really high in ammonia. If you've ever walked into a poorly maintained chicken coop and your eyes start burning, that's because of all the ammonia in their droppings. You can't put raw poultry manure on plants. It will actually burn them. That's how much nitrogen is in their manure. And birds have very sensitive respiratory systems, so you have to be careful and make sure you have good air quality in your coops. Another issue with poultry is they make a lot of dust, so you have to deal with that too. Feathers are very dusty, because when a feather comes out, it comes out in a little casing that sheds, and that makes a lot of dust. So those are some things to think about if you're raising hens, is air quality is really important.
How do you measure it?
How do you measure it?
Yes.
Most people just go by smell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there certain like can different breeds be together, and are there certain breeds that can't be together because they'll fight?
In most cases, yes. Chickens of different breeds can be together. From my experience, chickens are kind of racist. They tend to only like chickens of their own kind. I don't know how they know what they look like, but if you ever watch a group of chickens where you have multiple different breeds, they'll kind of segregate into their like own different breeds. One thing you should be careful with is mixing bantams, which are the miniature chickens, with the standard chickens, because the big chickens will beat them up. You should also be careful when you introduce young chickens with older chickens, because the older chickens will beat up the young chickens. And then as far as like different breeds go, I wouldn't put like flighty leghorns with the smarter dual purpose American breeds, just because it's not usually the best thing to do, because you have to maintain those breeds slightly different, because leghorns are really stupid. We bred their brains out of them and bred them specifically to just make a lot of giant eggs. So you kind of have to coddle them and, I don't know, keep them away from predators because they have no, like, preservation anymore.
They will kill themselves.
Yeah, same with meat chickens.
Oh, meat chickens are so fat. I love them.
Yes?
So you mentioned that if you introduce a young chicken, the older ones are going to speed them up. How do you handle a situation like that? I mean, how do you introduce a younger chicken to the pen with the other chicken?
For one, it helps if you don't just introduce one. Like if you have like a whole group of younger chickens, because then they can kind of split into their own little flock. It also helps if they're closer in size. If you can hold off putting the younger hens in until they're bigger. Because chickens are going to fight anytime you put a new chicken in. It's called the pecking order. That's where the term came from. Hens have a hierarchy. So there's the like top hen, and then it goes all the way down into the bottom chickens. The weaker hens are going to get pecked by the bigger hens, and they're going to lose feathers, and you kind of have to watch that kind of stuff, because if they're really getting beat up, they're going to end up with issues.
Does it change the hierarchy if you reorganize the pen?
Not usually. It's only usually changes the hierarchy when you introduce new birds,
Okay.
because they can tell each other apart somehow. Even if they all look the same to us, they know which chicken's which. Another question.
Alrighty.
Hey, I could literally talk about chickens forever.
So, winter is coming soon. Do you have a heater in your coop?
I don't have chickens right now.
Well, how should one handle a situation like that? Should you install a heater? Is the heat from the lamp enough?
Usually you want a heat lamp. That's what most people use.
Okay.
And then heated water dishes to keep the water from freezing.
Nice. Yeah.
Back when I first started raising chickens, they didn't have those like fancy like actual heated waters like the plastic ones.
Right.
You had to get one of those like super like metal like heaters that you put the metal water on top and that kind of thing. So they've actually improved that sort. But most people just use heat lamps. You just got to be careful that, for one, the hens can't get too close to the heat lamps, because they'll actually, I had a hen like start smoldering because she was too close to the heat lamp. She didn't realize it. No, I just smelled the burning feathers, and I like saw the hen had smoke coming off of her because she was too close to the heat lamp. She didn't seem to care. She was warm. But yeah, and make sure you have dry bedding, because if your bedding is wet or frozen, you can end up with frozen feet. Because some, especially roosters, I've found don't sleep on their feet.
Okay.
Like most hens will sit down and keep their feet warm. For some reason, roosters don't seem to do that. One way you can keep the like combs and wattles from freezing on mostly roosters, some hens have really big combs and wattles, is you can actually put Vaseline on their comb and wattle, and that helps insulate the heat because it's a fat layer, and it'll help keep it from getting frostbite, because that tends to be a really big problem in the Midwest.
Yeah, good to know. Thanks.
Fane answered a lot of our questions. How big of a coop is too big though? Like, we only have 6 birds, and we have to still build a permanent coop. We have just a simple Tractor Supply one at well right now.
I'm trying to remember.
I mean, we can buy some that are pre-built, which we may end up being at this point, but they're
Really,
big.
bigger isn't as bad as too small.
Okay.
The only issue I would see with having a big coop would be keeping it warm.
So we were debating about putting the little TSC one inside even, so they can go inside there where it's
Yeah,
they can be together then.
it's just heat, keeping them there and making sure they don't. Some chickens are stupid; they won't find their way back to the food and water.
Okay.
Especially if you have like the crested breeds, like Polish, they are the dumbest, I think, of all of them. Might be the fact they can't see anything, but I've had a Polish literally starve next to the feed.
Oh.
Like he couldn't find it.
So they just put their heads into it so they know where it is?
Well, unless he wanders away and can't find it again.
Alright.
Some people actually that have raised Polish actually trim their crests off, like in the winter because it's not show season. And if they're breeding, they'll trim their crests off so that they can see.
Got it.
So where do you get a job being a chicken hairstylist?
Judy, shut up.
I was looking at the ones where like when their hair gets really long and they put like a little scrunchie.
Yeah, I've seen people do that too.
It's like a diet.
They look like little 80s chickens.
You gotta get them some leg warmers too.
Polish chickens, actually, their skulls are shaped different. They have a dome on their skull that the crest grows off of. Some of them.
Cute.
But
I'm gonna die.
Or you can use.
did you have any more questions? Okay.
We have backyard chickens, so we have to follow city ordinances.
Oh yeah.
We have 2 girls that like to fly. We've done the one wing up to 15 feathers. We've tried both wings. We have this one that thinks it should still fly on our roof. Is there any? Yeah. I'm
What
not
breed
kidding
do you have?
The one that likes to fly on our roof is the Easter egger.
Okay.
And she is our pecking top order hen.
Yeah, Americanas tend to be a little bit difficult.
She's sweet though. I mean, she'll squat and let you pick her up. We have no. All of our girls are real nice. She likes to fly to the top of her house.
You know why she's squatting though, right?
She just started laying actually this week too, actually. So that was our sign. But when Bethany comes out, all of the girls will squat when they come up and let her pick her up.
Yeah, they're squatting because they think you're the rooster.
She grabs them and manhandles them. So yeah.
Yeah.
Good job, Bethany.
That's called the breeding crouch. Yeah.
Oh
Good job, Bethany. That's okay.
That's what it is.
Yeah, when they kind of put their wings apart and like turn into like a little wedge, that's because they're prepared.
They want to get it over with.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Roosters are not nice. They're not nice to their hens, the poor things. They'll actually, if you have a really aggressive rooster, he'll take the feathers right off her back. It's called treading. Because they're not gentle. They grab onto them by the back of their heads and they get the job done and they just don't. It's not a good time for the hens. I feel bad for them. Especially when you have like 5 roosters and they pick one favorite.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Poor favorite.
Yeah. Aggressive roosters don't tend to last very long on the farm I'm at. They get turned into soup.
Nice. Aggressive soup.
Yeah, aggressive soup.
We have rabbits there, and you learn to not feel bad for the mean ones.
Yeah.
There's a couple in there that I'm not going to feel remorseful for processing.
So, if you keep a rooster with several hens, how do you keep track of the breeding, and how do you know if the eggs are fertile or not?
A good rule if you're trying to breed is no more than 5 hens per rooster. He could probably service more, but you're more likely to get fertilized eggs from every hen if you have a smaller group. I think most poultry breeders usually hear about trios. I don't know how often that's how they breed, but it's 1 rooster for 2 hens, and then you're guaranteed all your eggs are basically going to be fertilized then.
Nice. Is it a same-day delivery, or do I have to wait like a week before they're fertilized?
Hens actually store sperm in their bodies for up to 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I don't know how long it takes like for the eggs to be fertilized. Like if you just put a rooster in there, I would probably wait probably a week and then your eggs should be fertilized. But yeah, you could get rid of a rooster and your hen could still be laying fertilized eggs for like another 2 weeks.
Got it.
Any other questions? Yes?
You did mention other bird species, pigeons. I have a question about quails too. What's your take on those kinds of poultry?
They're harder to manage. especially quail. I don't have much experience with quail. I had a couple little tiny button quail at one point. They were the stupidest birds I've ever had. Yeah, and gave themselves concussions and died. Yeah, so you have to have more specialized infrastructure if you're going to have quail, and you really don't want to mix like those types of birds with poultry or other, just because their behaviors are different and the things they need are different. I've had geese with chickens before. That was kind of out of necessity. It was cold and the geese needed somewhere to be because they didn't have like a goose house. So I put them in the chicken coop. They were okay until one day they decided to kill a chicken. You don't want to put pigeons with chickens because they're just completely different birds.
Right.
You don't generally want to have turkeys with chickens due to disease. Chickens tend to carry diseases that turkeys catch. It doesn't usually go the other way around.
Okay.
At the farm I work on, they do have chickens with turkeys, and it doesn't seem to be an issue. But you can end up with a disease called blackhead that will affect your turkeys, and it's generally deadly. So, and they get that from the manure of chickens. So, I mean, you can do it, but you're kind of playing the odds there. So,
Did you raise any Dominic chickens out here? Or no?
Dominics.
The black and white ones?
Yeah, I am aware of what they are. I've never raised them. I mostly prefer the Asiatic breeds, which are the really heavy birds with the feather feet. Yeah, the pants. That's just my personal preference.
Those in California, I just didn't know how they would do out here in the Midwest.
The smaller breeds tend to have a harder time in the winter. I know some people, when I was showing, would have sea brights. And sea brights are nearly impossible to raise in the Midwest at show quality because they get too big here. Because in order to survive the winters, they have to be bigger than they're supposed to be according to the standard. So you end up with the ones that survive, you're breeding, and then you end up breeding up because that's what happens, survival of the fittest. And then they don't end up doing very well at shows because they're too large for the standard. So it's hard to have the smaller birds, but Dominiques are a mid-sized bird. They're not quite, unless you're talking about the bantam variety.
The ones we had were pretty good size.
Yeah, then they'd probably be okay. Most, I don't know what you'd call them. I consider them basic chickens. So like, not like overly specialized. Like if you look at it, you'd be like, yeah, that's definitely a chicken. Will do okay, and as long as you have like a draft-free area, usually with a heat lamp when it gets really cold. So.
What's your favorite?
Black cochins.
Why?
Why? Because they're large and docile, and I like the way they look.
Are there any how do chickens show affection? Or do they not love us at all?
I'm not sure how much they actually like us.
That's
We are
sad.
we are food dispensers, so chickens don't tend to be cuddly. I mean, you can have some that will tolerate being handled.
Oh, that's so sad.
Well, they're flock animals, so they have some kind of bonding mechanism, but
Towards chickens. Other chickens.
well, yeah, you can have chickens bond to you, but it's like, they're still chickens. They're not gonna like rub up against your leg like a cat.
Just so we know, you want a cat that's a chicken.
No, I want a chicken.
A couple questions about chicken health. We haven't had any issues yet.
Okay, that's
But
good.
I know looking on Facebook, people talk about like lash egg, bumblefoot. I just know keep things clean. That's all we know.
Yeah,
we don't know
that's
anything
a
else.
good rule of thumb for preventing diseases. I would say one of the most common diseases you'll get in Wisconsin is upper respiratory disease or air sac disease. That's because they're cooped up in the winter, and that has to do a lot with air quality issues. And it's it's chicken cold basically. Usually they can get better from it. You can usually tell when it's coming on because they'll sneeze a lot. Chicken sneezes kind of just sound like a pew, pew.
Okay.
So if you hear that, that's them sneezing.
Sissy, it's that good.
When it gets real bad, you'll see them gasping, like they can't breathe.
Okay.
And at that point, sometimes they get better, sometimes they don't. Something that is hard with birds specifically is often you can't tell they're sick till it's too late. A lot of animals will hide being sick for the longest time because it's vulnerability. Birds can go from 0 to 100 as far as diseases go. So it's just know your hens, know what's normal for them. There's not very many vets that will do anything with chickens, sadly, because most people won't do anything about chickens. And a lot of vets don't know how to handle birds.
Do you want your microphone to work?
It is working.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's just not very loud.
Oh, I see. You want it louder?
I think everyone can hear me fine. I'm pretty loud.
Yeah.
Uh,
Quit trying to fix things.
Did you have another question?
No, that was, we were just, because we're new to this.
Yeah. I see bumblefoot a lot too.
We haven't heard that.
That's almost exclusively a cleanliness thing. They get it from. For you, those of you that don't know what bumblefoot is, it's a foot abscess on the bottom of their foot. It looks like a tiny little scab usually, and then like the bottom of their foot pad will swell up and become round, and the hen will usually end up having a limp. And they get that from scraping their paw on rocks that aren't clean or just poor sanitation in general. And the treatment for it is to just kind of lance it and clean out all the curd.
And we were told to wear gloves too, because it's staph.
Yeah.
Because it's bad for humans too.
Yeah. And it can be semi-contagious. But usually that won't kill them.
Okay.
What can cause them to die from bumblefoot would be their inability to walk anymore. I had to put down a hen at the farm that they didn't catch that it had bumblefoot because she has 100 chickens that you can only keep an eye on, so many, and they just went lame and couldn't get to the feed and water. So, anything else? I don't know how much time we got left.
First Super 8 starts at 15, so we
Alright, 15 minutes.
Me and Eddie are going to go get in our suits.
Alright, bye.
Oh, yeah, Jensen got you a thing.
Oh, it's a Dalek. Anything else? Otherwise, we can end a little bit early. If people want to get ready for the fursuit parade and stuff.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very instructive.
Very instructive. That's good. Have a good day. Have a good con.
Silver Gatoman, he bought me a coffee. Silver Gatoman, here is the song for thee. He likes to video all the panels at the cons. You should go and watch them whether they are short or long. Silver Gatoman, you video that's not a jibe. All of you go to his YouTube channel and like and subscribe.